In recent history, the white man has been known for a strong desire for economic enterprise. The white man's practicality, technological advances, and strong relation to physical reality has, until recently, led him to believe in his own superiority over other civilizations and cultures who are not as, for lack of better terms, scientifically, intellectual, and or ambitious. Using his strategy, technology, and lust for progress, the white man colonized many different areas around the world, regardless of the indigenous populations. His desire for material abundance inspired him to move into the New World. In America, space was abundant, so plantations became a very viable way for pursuing economic success. Crops such as tobacco, indigo, cotton, and sugar beets were harvested in southern colonies and often exported to Europe and other places. Cheap labor maximized profit, so businessmen would travel to West Africa to buy slaves. A new ethnic group was then added to the mix. African Americans were shipped in, stripped naked of their cultural heritage, and were forced to work in hard living conditions. In Western Africa, slaves were just the bottom of a social class. Nonetheless, they were still seen as a part of the greater society. However, because African Americans were introduced as slaves as a race to America, they were nothing but slaves and ex slaves. This led to poor treatment for them as a people. Even after the Emancipation and Civil War in the 1860s, tension lingered between the black man and the white. Segregation laws were abundant. There were normal There was normal social etiquette in the white man disrespecting the black man. The black man was a victim of hate and second-class citizenship for hundreds of years. Art became an outlet for the black man's anger and resentment, so the blues were born. With no means of escape, the black man was subjugated to the white man's desires, for the white man was the one with political and economic progress, power. A half century ago, the civil rights movement was coming to fruition. Many put their lives on the line and stand against the status quo of the current societal standards of the time. On May 17, 1954, the Supreme Court ruling of Brown versus Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas, unanimously agrees that segregation in public schools is unconstitutional. On December 1st, 1955, Rosa Parks put her foot down and decided it was unfair and took a stand against bus segregation. On August 28, 1963, Martin Luther King Jr. gave his famous I Have a Dream speech at the March on Washington for Jobs of Freedom. The Civil Rights of 1964 was signed by President Johnson. Job well done, you would guess. Following a performance in Rochester, New York, author Amiri Baraka states, from 1965 to 1968, Kennedy, King, Malcolm X, every voice for change in America was murdered. It took designated leaders who were completely devoted to their cause to create this change. This is what led to inspire Amiri Baraka to write his famous play Dutchman in 1967. It turns out that black culture was already spoken has already it turns out that black culture has always spoken out against their oppression, but through art. The economics have made it difficult to articulate and spread their message. This is caused by people's innate desire for cognitive closure or certainty. The delivery of the artist's message is often attached to idealism and attracts strong criticism. Sadly enough, those who speak a strong enough message are often crucified. Through the use of characters, plot, and as an example himself, Mary Baraka means to deliver these messages. Mary Baraka uses Dutchman to highlight how challenging the status quo through art is inherently very difficult. Dutchman takes place in the mid-60s on a subway in New York City. Clay is a 20-year-old middle-class black man on the way to a party. He sees out of the subway window a pretty white 30-year-old woman. Her name is Lula. He proceeds to stare at her until he's caught. She comes onto the train and sits next to him and starts flirting with him very quickly. This is when we get to know the two characters. Clay's name within itself has meaning. Clay is moldable in presentation and as an individual. At the start of the play, stage directions are given to Clay in response to Lula's approach. Leaning back against the window, a little surprised and maybe stiff. Page 6. More stage directions are given to Clay in reaction to Lula. Wheeling around and very much stiffened, also on page 6. Throughout the majority of the play, he is very reserved in his responses to Lula. He's pinging off Lula for how to act. Clay, as Lula describes, is a fake white man. It's not quotes in my essay, but I'm just using that for reference, which is evident to the way he presents himself with jackets buttoning up to the chin, Rocket 31, page 31, and being so full of white man's words, also on page 31. Judging off his overall presentation, Clay is someone who holds back his full personality and expression because he wants to do the right thing. He easily falls into the roles that are dictated to him, which is especially evident at the times of the story where Lula playfully coerces a reaction out of Clay. And Clay goes through the emotions, whether it is a stiff smile, or repeating after her when she tells him how to ask her to a party. In the story, Clay categorizes himself as a certain poet, quote unquote. Well, in college, I thought I was Baudelaire. Page 19. According to PoemHunter.com, Baudelaire was a poet whose works focused on rejection of the belief in democracy of nature, rejection of the belief in the supremacy of nature, and the fundamental goodness of men as typically espoused by romantics. And that's from the biography of Charles Baudelaire. By inference, we can assume that Clay, too, has resentment towards the entirety of men. Later in the story, when he explodes to the provocation of Lula, it becomes clear that deep down he is very angry at whites for the treatment of his people. Clay in his entirety represents the black man who is oppressed by the white man, but has a lot he wishes he could say that he instead uses art as an outlet for. Clay is an artist. Lula is much more the eccentric one. There aren't very many people, let alone guys, who have the guts to approach a stranger of the opposite sex, while Lula does it very confidently. However, while she is trying to provoke a reaction out of Clay, she says, "Yes, come on, Clay, let's do the nasty, rub bellies, rub bellies." Page 30. The pure absurdity of her actions with Clay either suggests that she is just toying with Clay, or she is insane, or a little bit of both. Lula continues to provoke him by calling him names such as a liver-lipped white man, Baraka 31. The fact that she is acting in such a way suggests that she is trying to provoke an angry reaction out of Clay. Plus, at the end of the play, when another Negro man is introduced, it seems as if this is all a game that Lula continually plays. When Baraka initially describes the scene with Lula, he writes, Lula enters from the rear of the car in bright, skimpy summer clothes and sandals. Lula is a tall, slender, beautiful woman with long red hair hanging straight down from her back, wearing only loud lipstick in somebody's god taste. Page 5. Baraka makes it clear that he is outlining Lula as the one with the goods. Lula's apparel suggests a very apparent and confident statement of sexuality. Lula's overall appearance outlines a physical archetype of a woman that many men would be very fond of. Her loud lipsticks further suggest that she is sexual and consenting. Also in reference to her lipstick, we can assume she thinks she is all that. This is also evident throughout the play with her dialogue when she flirts with Clay. Her confidence outlines a shadow aspect of her personality, which is that she has a combined lack of empathy with Clay and an entitlement to mess with him. It is especially clear that when he begins actively provoking Clay to the core of his anger. She is very confident, and because she has the goods, she makes Clay fall into actions or assume any role she wants. Lula represents the white man and his cultural persona. The story spends time outlining the characters and the nature of their relationship. More people get on the subway, and Lula and Clay's relationship takes a different direction when Lula begins actively provoking Clay to anger. Clay explodes and goes on a long rant about the nature of how his people have been treated malevolently for all too long, and his true feelings towards the greater majority, whites. Upon choosing to leave, Lula stabs Clay in the chest twice and gets the help of the rest of the people in the subway to help her dispose of the body. She gets away with it, and the story ends with her finding another young black man who she then moves towards. Economics make it hard for someone like Clay to carry his message that he was killed for sharing to millions of people. In Baraka's Blues People, he states, in the West, the triumph of the economic over the imaginative, Brooks Adams said, made possible this dreadful split between life and art. Hence, a music that is an art music, as distinguished from something someone would whistle while tilling a field. Baraka is absolutely right. It is apparent within pop culture that large-scale art, whether it be music, novels, or movies, are within the bounds of socially acceptable subjects. As a side note, I wanted to add this, not excuse me. I wanted to add this, not the case because of malevolence, it's because no one wants to lose all their money on an investment. Artists, especially nowadays, tend to only tread on topics such as relationships, sex, drugs, partying, and believing in yourself, or some kind of reference to not caring what other people think about you. Novels and movies have a broader range of subjects to cover, but I would argue in my opinion that this is only the case since they are more easily targeted demographics. This is the issue since the message will often be drowned out. An independent political rapper, Immoral Technique, often preaches about how he turned down large record labels because of how they would control his perspective he was sharing. Source being Archie's interview with Russia Today. In Baraka's Black Music, he states, but R&B now, with the same help from white America in its exploitation of energy for profit, strings that music out along a weakening line. Page 180. The white man, or any man, or corporation, who has financial influence tends to have very arbitrary views and economic motives. Somebody who has reached a point of affluence naturally is going to gravitate towards finding ways to increasing it further, even at the cost of diluting a message. There will obviously be a degree of exploitation, since it's probably not in the best interest of the artist to do this. In the beginning of the second scene, when Lula and Clay are discussing who their gods are, Lula says, me, and you? To which Clay responds, a corporate godhead. Baraka 23. Amiri Baraka is perfectly outlining the relationship between an investor and an artist. Lula represents the investor, or corporation in a larger sense, sees herself as God. She is the authority on what should or shouldn't be done. She gets to play God by using his power of calling all of the shots and determining what code of ethics to follow. Clay, representing the artist, sees his God as a corporate godhead. The artist knows that in order to get his message out, he is at the whim of an investor. He has to fall into the code of ethics and directions that are laid for him by the investor. It's all about scalability, alienating as few consumers as possible. When we deal with talking about sensitive subject topics, naturally many people will be alienated. Why couldn't it be that human civilization existed where people were open-minded to serious change? After all, in the eyes of idealism, that could lead to some serious progress. It turns out that people naturally have a strong desire for cognitive closure. For the sake of clarification, cognitive closure is a man's strong inclination to gravitate towards any conclusion that he wants to believe out of its own convenience. It's called seeing the world the way you want to see it versus seeing the world the way it actually is, so to speak. This is because human society is naturally hierarchical. We naturally have a balance of people who think and give orders and those who follow. In Blues People, Amiri Baraka states, but one of the most persistent traits of the Western white man has always been his fanatical and almost instinctive assumption that his systems and ideas about the world are the most desirable, and further, that people who do not aspire to them, or at least think them admirable, are savages or enemies. Other major cultures, such as Tibet and other Asian cultures, are often more open-minded. Baraka means to imply that Western white men's culture is very rooted in the ego, the I. When think about it, reality TV shows and other mind-numbing programs are often based in conflict, where each person thinks they are right and neither admits what they can improve on. Very often, neither looks for a bigger picture understanding that would quickly dispel the tensions. Living in a society where people constantly are trying to make their point and be right gives very little room for newer, more complex ideas that some kind of revolutionary would want to express. If a normal person in society cannot admit to their lack of listening skills, for example, it would be expecting a toddler to lift a car with one hand for this person to consider perspectives that could shatter the current reality construct of the world. Most people will spare any temporary feeling of stupidity or fear and instead lie to themselves so that they don't have to think. Even in some cases, it means that it'll lead to their death. This is too sensitive a topic to cite examples with. Amiri Baraka exposes the desire for cognitive closure in Dutchman when Lula starts stating the assumptions of who she thinks Clay is. Clay responds, "Really? I look like all of that?" Lula says, "No, not all of that." Stage direction. She feints a seriousness to cover an actual somber tone. I lie a lot. Smiling. It helps me control the world. Page 8. This dialogue outlines how in the historical conflict between blacks and whites, the whites oftentimes would assume they knew and understood the blacks. This provided a sort of box the white man could put the black man in and would expect him to not act outside of it. Lula's expression, not all of it, symbolizes the white man's inclination to overproject what they thought of any individual black man, or alien ethnic group for that matter. Clay's submissiveness and choice to not challenge Lula symbolizes the black man's choice to keep himself safe by playing the roles expected of him by the white man. The black man knows it's not worth the aggravation of both parties, and that it's not worth making his life even more difficult by stepping outside these roles. Since the white man has what the black man wants, social, political, and economic power. I lie a lot symbolizes the white man's economic system spitting out social narratives, stories of how the world works, and beliefs for everybody to latch. It helps me control the world, highlights how creating lies in the form of these stories and beliefs is an effective way to consolidate power. These beliefs and narratives are hammered in and are often the very thing that an artist would wish to contest. With no intention of being cynical, it's very difficult for an artist to challenge things merely through their words. The artist's strong idealist values tend to alienate himself or herself, and his or her message. Clay and Baraka are both good examples of this. In the theater, Baraka states, the revolutionary theater must expose, show up the insides of these humans, look into black skulls. White men will cower before this theater because it hates them, because they have been trained to hate. The evolutionary theater must hate them for hating. Baraka is fully expressing his anger. Bravo! But in a world where people are easily emotionally activated by having their belief systems critiqued, anger is a very easy way to inspire people to dismiss alternate points of view. It gives people no patience, and it inherently is often too self-focused in terms of ideals. Idealists tend to be very hypocritical. They share a point of view, that others refuse to see, then the idealist turns around and refuses to acknowledge the other's personal experiences and point of view. Idealists who feel unheard discount all their viewpoints that he or she feels all are redundant. This accentuates a degree of separation between the idealist and the masses. Philip Roth highlights this in his critique of Dutchman when he says, rather, it is a rage, it is blind, and artistic considerations aside, it may well have been made it nearly impossible for him to write an important play. Roth, while Clay is on his rant in a reaction to Lula, he says, with no more blues except the very old ones, and not a watermelon in sight, the great missionary heart will have triumphed, and all these ex-coons will be stand-up Western men, with eyes for clean, hard, useful lives, sober, pious, insane, and they'll murder you. They'll murder you, and they have very rational explanations. Clay is referring to the abolishment of this culture for assimilation into the white culture throughout his statement, especially true when he refers to his people as ex-coons, or to be stand-up Western men, as the white man would want. He outlines the perspectives of the black man that are normally held back. His strong poetic expression of anger leads to a truth about his people. Clay's reference to murder holds a lot of weight and seems a valid point when listening to the whole rant. No one wants to hear it, so he's crucified. Mary Baraka uses Dutchman to highlight how challenging the status quo through art is inherently very difficult, involving money, often changes and dilutes the message when it is distributed on a large scale. This is because people want to feel certain about their own worldview, with no one wants to lose money. Artists as idealists carrying messages tend to create too much cognitive dissonance. Through the use of characters and plot, Baraka makes all of this clear in his play. It is not easy, excuse me, it is not to say it is impossible to carry a powerful message to a large group of people through art, just that it's very difficult. And here's the works cited. Title, David and the Giant, written November 10th, 2014, in English class at Chabot College.